The rock behind Lieutenant Commander Marcus Thorne exploded, showering him with granite chips that stung his face like 1,000 angry wasps. Dust and cordite choked the thin mountain air, a foul incense for their last rites. Below him, in the godforsaken bowl of the Tangi Valley, the last vestiges of Trident IV were being systematically dismantled. 6 men, the best America had to offer, were trapped, bleeding, and staring death in its hollow eyes. The rhythmic thump-thump-thump of a Dishike heavy machine gun echoed off the canyon walls, each concussion and nail being hammered into their collective. Coffin, anything, ghost. Thorne yelled into his comms, his voice a raw rasp. The reply from his comm specialist was clipped, laced with a metallic taste of futility. Negative, sir. The jammer's too strong. Nothing in, nothing out. We are on our own. On their own. The 3 deadliest words in the Special Operations vocabulary. They had walked into the valley chasing a high-value target, a notorious bombmaker with a ghost's reputation. But the intel had been bad. Not just bad, it had been a lie, a carefully laid piece of cheese in a steel trap. Now, the hunters were the hunted, surrounded on 3 sides by a force of at least 50, maybe more, insurgents who knew the terrain like the back of their own bloodstained hands. What was supposed to be a quiet snatch and grab had devolved into a full-blown Alamo, and they were fresh out of heroes. Thorne risked a glance over his meager cover. Muzzle flashes winked from the ridgeline opposite them, a constellation of impending doom. He saw one of his men, Preacher, slump forward, a dark stain spreading across his shoulder. Another man down. Hope, he realized with a cold, sinking finality, had just bled out on a desolate peak in Afghanistan. Who would even know how? They died. 300 miles away, at Bagram Airfield, the air was thick with a different kind of tension. Captain Anya Valkyrie Sharma stared at the flight roster on the monitor, her jaw set so tight it ached. Her call sign, Archangel 1, was listed under QRF, Quick Reaction Force. But next to it was the name of another pilot, Captain Davis, a man who flew with more bravado than skill. She knew what it meant. She was the backup, the in case of emergency, break glass option that her commanding officer, Colonel Hastings, hoped he'd never have to use. Hastings didn't trust her. He'd never said it outright, but it was there in his condescending tone, in the way he'd assign her routine patrols over quiet sectors while men she'd outscored in every training simulation got the real world. Missions. He saw her as a statistic, a poster child for the Air Force's diversity initiatives, not a warrior. He saw a woman in a flight suit, not the predator she knew herself to be. The air in the command center was stale, smelling of burnt coffee and low-grade anxiety. Screens glowed with satellite feeds and drone footage, painting a sterile, digital picture of distant conflicts. Anya watched them, her mind tracing the flight paths, calculating fuel consumption, and rehearsing weapons deployment sequences. She did it obsessively, a ritual to keep her edge honed to a razor's sharpness. Her co-pilot gunner, a young warrant officer named Jimmy Rookie Evans, fidgeted beside her, nervously tapping his helmet. He was a good kid, but green. He'd never seen a real firefight, never heard the sickening thwomp of enemy rounds, hitting the armored skin of their AH-64E Apache Guardian. Anya, on the other hand, had. She'd danced on that razor's edge before, and the experience had left a quiet coldness in her that most mistook for aloofness. It wasn't aloofness, it was focus. It was the calm that came from knowing that in a cockpit, hurtling through the sky at 200 miles an hour, there was no room for anything but the mission. Don't worry, rookie, she said, her voice low and even, not taking her eyes off the screens. Most nights, we just sit here and drink bad coffee. You'll be back at the barracks in time to watch the game. Before Evans could reply, a klaxon blared, a piercing, urgent sound that cut through the low hum of the operations center. Everyone froze. On the main screen, a red circle flashed over a remote sector in the Hindu Kush Mountains. The Tangi Valley. A comms officer ripped off his headset, his face pale. Sir, we've lost contact with Trident IV. Their last transmission was a distress call, ambushed, heavy casualties, coordinates locked. The room erupted into controlled chaos. Men scrambled, voices barking orders. Colonel Hastings strode to the center of the room, his face a grim mask. Get me a predator feed on those coordinates, now. Scramble the PJs. I want every asset we have spinning up. His eyes scanned the room, and for a fleeting second, they met Anya's. She saw it again, the flicker of doubt. He didn't want to send her. But she was the pilot on duty. Her Apache, call sign Archangel 1, was hot, armed, and ready. It was her turn in the barrel. Protocol was protocol. Captain Davis is on a 24-hour stand-down. An aide reported, his voice tight. It has to be Sharma, sir. Hastings chewed on his lip, his gaze fixed on the storm patterns swirling over the target area. A massive weather front was moving in, a tempest of wind, snow, and lightning that would make any flight treacherous, let alone a combat rescue in unforgiving mountain terrain. To fly into that was a suicide mission. But not. Flying meant leaving 6 SEALs to die. It was a choice between 2 impossibilities. He turned to Anya, his expression hard. Captain Sharma, this isn't a training sim. Those are the best men we have, pinned down in a kill box. The weather is red on all approaches. The rules of engagement are fluid. Do you understand what I'm asking? Anya met his gaze without blinking. Her heart was a cold, steady drum against her ribs. She felt the weight of every condescending glance, every dismissive comment he'd ever made. This was it. This was the moment that would define her. I understand, Colonel, she said, her voice devoid of any emotion except absolute certainty. My bird is ready. Just tell me where to point it. Her calm seemed to unnerve him more than any bravado would have. He hesitated for a beat. Longer, then nodded curtly. Go. Get them out. Anya turned and walked away, Evan scrambling to keep up. She didn't look back. There was no time for doubt, no time for the politics of the command bunker. Out on the flight line, the ground. Crews were already pulling the chocks from her Apache. The machine looked like a prehistoric insect, a thing of brutal purpose, bristling with Hellfire missiles and rocket pods. Its 30mm chain gun hung below its chin like a venomous stinger. This was her domain. In the air, there were no colonels, no genders, no opinions. There was only the pilot, the machine, and the mission. She knew what it was to push past the limits, to hold your ground when everything tells you to run. If you believe in standing your ground, no matter the odds, hit that like button to show you're riding with Archangel 1 tonight. Back in the Tangi Valley, Thorne's world had shrunk to the space behind a single, crumbling rock. The sun was gone, replaced by an oppressive, inky blackness that the enemy owned. Night vision optics gave the world a sickly green glow, turning the familiar faces of his men into ghostly masks. They were down to their last magazines. Preacher was unconscious, his breathing shallow. 2 others had serious wounds. Thorne had taken shrapnel to his leg, a hot, searing pain that he walled off in a distant corner of his mind. He checked his watch. Hours had passed. No one was coming. The silence between bursts of gunfire was somehow worse than the noise. It was a heavy, suffocating blanket of despair. He crawled over to Deacon, his second in command, a man whose faith was as legendary as his marksmanship. Deacon was quietly reciting a psalm, his knuckles white as he clutched the small, worn cross around his neck. Looks like this is it, Marcus, Deacon whispered, his eyes scanning the ridgeline. We gave it a hell of a run. Thorne didn't reply. He pulled a fresh magazine from his vest, his last one. He chambered around, the metallic clack echoing in the profound silence. He looked at the faces of his men, these warriors he'd led through hell and back, and saw not fear, but a grim, fatalistic acceptance. They were SEALs. They would not be taken alive. They would sell their lives dearly, making the enemy pay for every inch of ground and blood. He keyed his comms on the team's private channel, his voice low and steady, a captain addressing his crew for the last time. Trident 4, listen up, he began, the words tasting like ash in his mouth. There's no ride coming. This is where we make our stand. It's been the greatest honor of my life to serve with you. Say your piece. Make it count. He saw men bow their heads. He heard Deacon's whispered prayer grow a little louder. They were saying goodbye to their families, to their lives, to the world. A profound sorrow washed over Thorne, colder and sharper than the mountain wind. He thought of his wife, of the daughter he hadn't seen in 6 months. He closed his eyes, picturing her face, and said his own silent prayer. Not a prayer for rescue, but a prayer for forgiveness. Then, a new sound cut through the night. It wasn't gunfire. It was a low, distant hum, a rhythmic chopping that seemed to vibrate in his bones. It grew louder, closer. The insurgents heard it too. Their fire slackened, their attention turning to the sky. Thorne and his men looked up, their hearts caught in their throats. Was it friendly? Or was it an enemy gunship coming to finish the job? The sky was a maelstrom of black clouds and driving snow. Nothing should be able to fly in this. It was impossible. Anya Sharma fought the controls with everything she had. The Apache bucked and shuddered, thrown about by vicious crosswinds that howled through the mountain passes. The storm was worse than predicted. Ice was forming on her rotor blades, a deadly threat that could throw the aircraft into an uncontrollable spin. Alarm screamed in her headset, a symphony of electronic panic. Rookie was beside her, his face ashen in the green glow of the instrument panel, his knuckles white where he gripped the controls. Valkyrie, the turbulence is tearing us apart, he yelled over the intercom. The official route is impassable. We have to turn back. Anya's eyes were fixed on the navigation display, her focus absolute. The designated flight path was a longer, safer route that wound through the lower valleys. But it was also a death sentence for the men on the ground. They didn't have that kind of time. There was another way, a direct route through a treacherous, narrow canyon known as the Needle's Eye. It wasn't an officially sanctioned flight path. It was a legend among pilots at Bagram, a place where the unwary went to die. Flying it in clear daylight was considered reckless. Flying it at night, in a blizzard, was considered suicide. We are not turning back, Anya said, her voice a blade of steel. She banked the Apache hard, ignoring the groaning protest of the airframe. She was going straight into the belly of the beast. Colonel Hastings's voice crackled in her ear, sharp and furious. Archangel One, what is your status? Your telemetry shows you're off course. You are heading directly for the Needle's Eye. I am ordering you to abort. That is a direct order, Captain. Abort now. Anya looked at the fuel gauge. She looked at the clock. She thought of the 6 men on the ground, their lives measured in seconds. An order was an order. Disobeying it could mean the end of her career. But following it would mean the end of 6 lives. Her choice was instant, absolute, and her own. She reached down and with a single, deliberate motion, switched her radio to the encrypted channel that connected her only to her co-pilot and the troops on the ground. Hastings's voice vanished, replaced by a blanket of static. She was cut off. She was alone. Rookie stared at her, his eyes wide with a mixture of terror and awe. Captain, what did you just do? Anya's gaze didn't waver from the churning darkness ahead. I'm taking them home, Rookie, she said, her voice a low whisper against the roar of the engines and the fury of the storm. Or I'm dying with them. She pushed the collective forward, sending the Apache surging into the mouth of the canyon, a black abyss from which no pilot had ever returned in a storm like this. The Needle's Eye wasn't a canyon. It was a scar carved into the face of the earth by a vengeful god. Sheer rock walls, invisible in the consuming darkness, shot up thousands of feet on either side. The Apache, a marvel of modern engineering, was reduced to a fragile toy tossed on the whims of a furious, freezing gale. Every gust of wind threatened to slam them into the granite cliffs. Snow and ice pelted the armored canopy, the sound like handfuls of gravel being thrown against a window. Anya flew on instruments alone, her world shrinking to the glowing dials and the ghostly green images on her heads-up display. Her hands were a blur on the cyclic and collective controls, making hundreds of micro-adjustments every second, a desperate, violent ballet to keep them from being torn apart, altitude dropping. 500 feet. Rookie's voice was a strained gasp in her headset. Pull up. For God's sake, pull up. Negative, Rookie. Anya countered, her voice tight but unwavering. The downdrafts are too strong. If I try to climb, we'll stall. I have to ride it down, use the ground effect to cushion us. It was a maneuver straight out of the high-risk section of the flight manual, something you practiced in a simulator but prayed you'd never have to do for real. She was intentionally letting the aircraft fall, plummeting toward the unseen valley floor, hoping to find a pocket of calmer air near the ground. It was like jumping off a cliff and trying to weave a parachute on the way down. Her entire body was coiled like a spring, every nerve ending alive with adrenaline. She could feel the aircraft's agony through the controls, the groaning of the rotor mast, the shudder of the fuselage. This was where pilots were made or broken, in the heart of the storm, with nothing but skill and sheer force of will to keep death at bay. She remembered a moment from her training at Fort Rucker. Her instructor, a grizzled chief warrant officer, For named Pops, who had flown Cobras in Desert Storm, had put her in a simulator and thrown an identical scenario at her. A night flight, a mountain storm, multiple system failures. She'd failed. The simulated crash had been violent, the screen flashing red with the words, "Mission failure." Afterward, Pops hadn't yelled. He'd simply looked at her with his tired, knowing eyes and said, "The machine is a beast, Sharma. It has a soul. You don't tell it what to do. You listen to it. You feel what it needs. Until you can do that, you're not a pilot, you're just a passenger holding the controls." She'd spent the next 6 months in that simulator, long after everyone else had gone home. She flew until her eyes burned and her hands were raw. She learned the Apache's language, the subtle shift in vibration that preceded a compressor. Stall, the change in the rotor's acoustics just before it hit its stress limit. She learned to feel the air, to listen to the beast. Now, in the heart of the needle's eye, that brutal training was all that was keeping them alive. She listened. The beast was screaming, but she could hear what it needed. A little less collective. A touch of left rudder, a gentle forward pressure on the cyclic. She wasn't fighting the storm anymore, she was dancing with it. Slowly, agonizingly, the descent began to slow. The altimeter stabilized at 100 feet. They were flying blind, 100 feet above a rocky canyon floor, but they were flying dead on the ground. The SEALs of Trident 4 were huddled behind their crumbling cover, the strange, promising sound of rotor blades swallowed by the howling wind. Had they imagined it? Was it just the wind playing tricks on their desperate minds? The enemy fire had picked up again, more intense this time, as if the insurgents were trying to finish the job before whatever was coming could arrive. RPGs streaked across the valley, exploding against the rocks with concussive force, sending shrapnel whistling through the air. Anything on the radio? Ghost. Thorne grunted, pulling a wounded teammate. Crash. Further behind cover, just static. Sir, Ghost replied, his face grim. Whatever it was, it's gone. Despair, cold and absolute, settled over Thorne once more. It had been a phantom, a ghost of hope. He looked at his men. Their faces were etched with pain and exhaustion, but their eyes still held a flicker of defiance. They would die on their feet. That was the SEAL way. He raised his rifle, preparing for the final rush he knew was coming. It was then that Deacon, who was staring intently into his thermal scope, suddenly stiffened. "Marcus, look," he whispered, his voice filled with a strange reverence. "Up there. Dear God in heaven." Thorne followed his gaze. At the far end of the valley, emerging from the swirling black mouth of the needle's eye, a shape appeared. It was angular, menacing, and utterly impossible. An Apache helicopter, flying impossibly low, its silhouette a dark promise of retribution. Against the stormy sky. It wasn't flying gracefully. It was limping, staggering through the air like a wounded animal, but it was coming. A single, solitary gunship, challenging the heart of a blizzard for them. A surge of disbelief and ferocious hope shot through Thorne's chest. He didn't know who was flying that bird, but they were either the bravest pilot in the entire US, military, or the craziest. "Contact," he roared into his comms, his voice suddenly alive with renewed fire. "We have an angel on station. Light 'em up. Mark targets with IR strobes." Instantly, the men of Trident 4 switched on their infrared. Strobes. To the naked eye, nothing changed. But to the advanced thermal imaging systems of the Apache, the battlefield would now be illuminated with blinking beacons, marking friendly positions. Inside the cockpit, Anya saw the strobes flicker to life. On her display, a neat, tight circle of blinking lights surrounded by a swarm of enemy heat signatures. There they were. 6 strobes. 6 men still alive. A fierce, protective instinct washed over her. These were her people to protect, her responsibility. The flight through the storm had been for survival. Now, the fight began. "Rookie, you with me?" she asked, her voice calm as a frozen lake. Evans, who had been muttering a prayer for the last 10 minutes, took a deep, shaky breath. Seeing. The friendly strobes on the screen seemed to focus him. The terror in his eyes was replaced by a flicker of determination. "Yes, Captain. I'm with you. Targeting systems are online. We have 30 mil, rockets, and 8 Hellfires ready to party." "Good," Anya said. "Let's not keep the hosts waiting." But as she began to climb, angling the Apache for its first attack run, a new warning light flashed on her console. It was a small detail, Something easily missed in the heat of the moment. A sensor on the main gearbox was showing a pressure fluctuation. It could be nothing, a minor glitch caused by the extreme cold. Or it could be a sign of catastrophic mechanical failure, a direct result of the stress the storm had put on the airframe. The gearbox was the heart of the helicopter. If it seized, the rotors would stop turning, and they would drop out of the sky like a stone. This was the mini reveal she hadn't anticipated. Her savior aircraft might be a ticking time bomb. The beast she had tamed was now wounded, and it might betray her at any moment. She had a choice. She could play it safe, stay at a higher altitude and provide suppressive fire from a distance. Or she could go in low and fast, the way the mission required, and risk the entire aircraft coming apart around her. To be effective, to end this quickly and save those men, she had to get close. She had to dance in the heart of the fire. Every second she hesitated was another second the SEALs were taking fire. For a moment, her resolve wavered. The fear was real, a cold knot in her stomach. What was the right call? For all her training, there was no simulator for a choice like this, with real lives hanging in the balance. Her own life was on that list. She thought about the promise she'd made to herself. Take them home. She wasn't about to break it. Anya pushed the thought of the failing gearbox out of her mind. It was a distraction. It was noise. She would fly until the wings fell off, literally if she had to. This was the core of a warrior spirit, the willingness to step into the abyss for someone else. Anyone who's ever made a tough choice for the sake of others knows that feeling. If you've ever put someone else first, subscribe to this channel and let us know you're one of the quiet heroes. She keyed her radio to the SEAL's frequency. Her voice, filtered through the comm system, was low, calm, and unexpectedly deep, stripped of any identifying feminine qualities. It was the voice of pure, deadly competence. Trident 4, this is Archangel 1. I am on station. Stand by for fireworks. Designate primary target. On the ground, Thorne heard the voice in his ear. It was the calmest voice he'd ever heard. In the middle of a firefight. It sounded like the voice of God, if God flew a billion-dollar attack helicopter. There was no panic, no stress, just a simple, direct statement of intent. He felt a wave of relief so powerful it almost buckled his knees. Archangel, this is Trident Actual, he replied, his own voice cracking with emotion. Glad you could make it to the party. We have a Dishike position on the northern ridgeline. Coordinates 097. They are our primary threat. Put them to sleep. Solid copy. Trident, the voice replied. Target acquired. Going loud. Anya lined up the shot. Through her helmet-mounted display, she could see the world as the Apache's gun system saw it, a high-contrast thermal image. The Dishike emplacement glowed white-hot, a beacon of death that had been tormenting the SEALs for hours. She squeezed the trigger on her cyclic. The Apache's 30mm chain gun, the M230, roared to life directly beneath her feet. It wasn't a staccato burst of fire. It was a deep, guttural BUUURP, a sound that tore the night open. A stream of high-explosive, dual-purpose rounds, each the size of a large carrot, erupted from the muzzle at a rate of 10 per second. The shells slammed into the machine gun nest, turning the rock and the men behind it into a cloud of vaporized dust and shrapnel. The relentless thump-thump-thump that had been the soundtrack to their impending deaths was silenced instantly. The SEALs let out a ragged, primal cheer. It was the first small victory in a night of unending defeat. They watched in, or as the Apache, a black phantom against the stormy sky, pirouetted with impossible grace and lined up its next shot. But the enemy was not stupid. They were seasoned fighters. They knew that their biggest threat was now this lone gunship. As Anya banked for another run, a new threat emerged from the darkness. On a ridge to the east, a position they hadn't seen before, a team of insurgents scrambled to set up a ZU-23-2, a twin-barreled anti-aircraft cannon. It was a weapon designed specifically to kill helicopters. A green stream of tracer rounds suddenly reached up from the darkness, a glowing hand trying to snatch her from the sky. The first shells stitched a line across the valley, missing her by 100 feet. The second burst was closer, exploding in the air with angry black puffs of flak. Rookie screamed into the intercom. Anti-aircraft gun. 9 o'clock low. They've got our range. Anya saw it. She threw the Apache into a violent evasive maneuver, jinking left and then right, but the gunners were good. One of the shells found its mark. There was a deafening bang, and the entire aircraft shuddered violently, as if punched by a giant fist. Red lights flared across her dashboard. The cockpit filled with the acrid smell of burning electronics. The gearbox warning light, which had been flickering intermittently, now blazed a steady, terrifying red. The beast was not just wounded anymore. It was crippled. And deep in the canyon, the ZU-23 swiveled, its twin barrels hungry for the kill. Shot, preparing to tear her and her Apache out of the sky for good. The explosion rocked the cockpit with savage force. A piece of shrapnel punched through the canopy, a razor-sharp shard of metal that sliced across Anya's left arm before embedding itself in the console just inches from Rookie's face. Pain, hot and immediate, flared up her arm, but she ignored it. The Apache yawed violently to the right, the tail rotor struggling to compensate for the damage. The steady, reassuring hum of the twin turbines was gone, replaced by a grinding, discordant raw damage report. Anya snapped, her voice a whip-crack of command that cut through Rookie's panic. Right engine is out. Main gearbox pressure is critical. We are losing hydraulic fluid. Rookie rattled off the litany of failures, his voice trembling. Captain, we have to get out of here. The manual says we disengage. We RTB. We are a flying coffin. The manual didn't account for 6 men trapped on that ridge. Anya shot back, fighting the controls. The stick felt heavy and sluggish in her hands, like trying to steer a ship with a broken rudder. The wounded beast was resisting her, trying to die. But she wouldn't let it. Not yet. The ZU-23 is still active. If we leave now, the SEALs are dead. We stay and fight. Her decision was absolute. There was no calculation of risk, no weighing of options. It was a simple, brutal equation, her life for theirs. It was the promise every soldier makes, a promise signed in blood and sealed with honor. This deep-seated sense of duty is something that resonates with anyone who has ever worn a uniform or protected a loved one. If you understand what it means to put others before yourself, hit that subscribe button, because you know this. Fight is far from over. On the ground, the SEALs watched in horror as Archangel One took the hit. The gunship faltered in the air, its silhouette stark against the occasional flash of lightning. For a heart-stopping moment, they thought it was going down. He's hit. He's hit bad. Crash yelled, his own pain forgotten. Thorne held his breath, his knuckles white on his rifle. He had seen countless aircraft shot down. He knew the death spiral, the sickening finality of it. But this pilot was different. The Apache didn't fall. It shuddered, it bled smoke, but it stayed in the air. It was as if the pilot was holding it aloft by sheer, indomitable will. Then, to his utter astonishment, the gunship's nose dipped. It wasn't retreating. It was turning back toward the enemy, diving straight at the anti-aircraft gun that had just tried to kill it. What in God's name is he doing? Deacon whispered, his voice a mix of awe and terror. He's attacking. Anya had entered. A state of pure, unadulterated focus. The pain in her arm, the screaming alarms, the smoke in the cockpit, it all faded into the background. Her universe consisted of only 2 things: the enemy gun emplacement glowing in her thermal sights and the weapon system still at her command. Her right engine was dead, but her left was still screaming. Her hydraulics were failing, but she still had pressure. Her bird was crippled, but it wasn't dead. Rookie, give me a targeting solution for a rocket run, she commanded. Salvo fire, all pods. Captain, at this angle, with this damage, the recoil could send us into an uncontrollable spin. Rookie protested, his training screaming at him that this was suicide. Get me the solution, Evans, Anya repeated, her voice leaving no room for argument. Rookie's hands flew across his console, his fear momentarily eclipsed by the sheer force of her command. He locked the ZU-23 position. A green targeting box appeared on Anya's display. Target locked. Firing solution is unstable, but it's locked. Good man, Anya said. She dove, pointing the nose of her wounded helicopter directly at the source of the tracer fire. The world outside became a blur of rock and snow. The ZU-23 gunners, seeing the Apache coming right at them, threw everything they had at her. Green tracers clawed at the sky around the cockpit. Anya didn't flinch. She was inside their firing arc now, too close for them to depress their guns enough to hit her. She was using their own aggression against them. Day T 500 yards, she let loose. Rockets away. Two pods on her stub wings erupted in a flash of fire and smoke. A swarm of 1970mm rockets screamed toward the target. They impacted not as a series of individual explosions, but as a single, devastating cataclysm of fire and steel. The entire ridge where the Zu-23 had been simply vanished in a roiling fireball that lit up the entire valley, briefly turning night into a hellish, orange day. The SEALs shielded their eyes, the heat of the blast washing over them even from a mile away. When the light faded, the Zu-23 was gone. The deadly stream of tracers was gone. There was only silence and the faint crackle of burning debris. Thorne lowered his rifle, his mouth agape. He had never seen anything like it. The sheer, calculated ferocity of the attack was breathtaking. This Archangel pilot wasn't just skilled. He was an artist of violence, a virtuoso of destruction. He was single-handedly turning the tide of a battle that, just minutes ago, had been hopelessly lost. He keyed his comms, his voice thick with a respect that bordered on reverence. Archangel, I don't know who you are, but you've got a steak dinner and a case of the best whiskey waiting for you when you get back to Bagram. Anya allowed herself the smallest ghost of a smile, a brief flicker of warmth in the cold cockpit. Copy that, Trident. But the party's not over yet. I'm showing multiple enemy positions converging on your location. Let's get to work. For the next 15 minutes, Anya Sharma became the angel of death the insurgents had always feared. With one engine and failing hydraulics, she made the crippled Apache dance. She was a phantom, appearing over a ridge to unleash a burst from a chain gun, then disappearing behind another before the enemy could draw a bead on her. She was a surgeon, using her remaining Hellfire missiles to surgically remove RPG teams from their dug-in positions. She anticipated the enemy's movements, flanking them, cutting off their routes of retreat, herding them into kill zones. She and Rookie worked in perfect sync now, a seamless extension of the machine. He called out targets, and she destroyed them, one after another. The SEALs on the ground were no longer defenders, they were participants in a hunt. Guided by the Apache, they began to move, flanking the disorganized and terrified enemy, their suppressed rifles adding to the symphony of destruction. The tide had not just turned, it had become a tsunami. The hunters had become the hunted once more. In the command center at Bagram, Colonel Hastings watched the drone feed in stunned silence. He had heard Anya disobey his order to abort. He had been preparing to court-martial her. Now, he was watching her single-handedly save the most elite special forces team in the US military, all while flying a helicopter that, by all rights, should have already crashed. The room was silent, the usual cacophony of voices hushed by the raw display of skill and courage they were witnessing. Hastings felt a prickle of something he hadn't felt in a long time. He was ashamed of his own doubt. He had misjudged her. Completely. He had seen her gender, not her talent. He had seen a risk, not the warrior who was now rewriting the rules of aerial combat over the Tangi Valley. Back in the fight, Anya was focused on the endgame. The bulk of the insurgent force was broken and retreating. But she knew the fight wasn't over until every threat was neutralized. Her senses swept the battlefield, searching for any remaining hostiles. And then she saw it. This was her mini-reveal, a deadly secret the battlefield had kept until now. Tucked away in a small, shadowed crevice on the valley floor, almost perfectly camouflaged, was a small team of men. They weren't shooting. They weren't running. They were setting something up. Something long and thin. Anya's blood ran cold. It was a man-pads, a man-portable air defense system, a shoulder-fired, heat-seeking missile, the ultimate helicopter. Killer man-pads, she screamed to Rookie. Valley floor, 11 o'clock. But it was too late. On her threat display, a new icon blinked to life, an alert she had only ever seen in the simulator. It was the infrared signature of a missile that had already been launched. It had a lock. It was coming for her one good engine. The system was designed to be almost instantaneous. By the time you get the warning, the missile is already in the air, traveling at over twice the speed of sound. You have, at best, a few seconds to react. Anya's training took over. She slammed the controls, yanking the Apache into a hard, diving turn, simultaneously deploying a volley of flares. The flares were brilliant magnesium charges designed to burn hotter than her engine exhaust, creating decoy targets for the heat-seeking. Missile flares. 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 Rookie yelled, his voice cracking outside the canopy, The world became a terrifying strobe of light and motion. Anya saw the missile, a thin, white smoke trail streaking through the dark. It was impossibly fast. The flares bloomed behind her, a desperate shower of incandescent hope. For a split second, the missile's guidance system was confused. It wavered, its nose twitching between the heat of the flares and the heat of her engine. The SEALs on the ground watched, helpless, as the drama unfolded in the sky above them. The smoke trail veered sharply, chasing one of the flares. A collective sigh of relief went through the cockpit and the men on the ground. It had worked, but the relief was premature. The missile was a newer generation, a sophisticated weapon with advanced countermeasure technology. Its seeker head recognized the flare for what it was, a decoy. It rejected the false target, and, with a terrifying correction, snapped back onto its original course. It was still locked onto her. It was still coming. The automated voice in Anya's helmet repeated the same phrase over and over in a calm, female tone that was horrifyingly out of place. Missile. 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 She had no more tricks. No more time. No more altitude. To trade for speed. The flares were spent. The evasive maneuver had failed. She could only watch as the thin white line of smoke grew larger in her canopy, a messenger of fiery death arriving to deliver its final, inescapable message. Her left hand instinctively tightened on the collective, a pilot's last, futile act of defiance against the inevitable. The missile filled her vision, and the world dissolved into a blinding white flash. The impact felt less like an explosion and more like the world being torn in half. A concussive wave of pure energy slammed into the Apache, lifting it and throwing it sideways. The sound was a physical blow, a deafening shriek of shearing metal and detonating fuel. Every alarm in the cockpit blared at once, a cacophony of electronic death screams. The left engine, the one good engine, disintegrated, sending a spray of shrapnel through the fuselage. One of the rotor blades, clipped by the explosion, snapped off with a sickening crack and cartwheeled into the darkness. The Apache, now stripped of all power, began to fall. It wasn't a spin. It wasn't a glide. It was a dead, terrifying drop. They were a 3-ton rock plummeting from the sky. We are going in. We are going in. Rookie screamed, his voice a raw shriek of pure terror, but Anya wasn't screaming. In the split second of the explosion, her mind had gone preternaturally calm. The chaos resolved into a clear, cold set of problems that needed to be solved. They were falling, yes, but they still had rotational energy in the main rotor. They were a helicopter for a few seconds more. This was auto-rotation, the dead-stick landing that pilots train for endlessly but almost never perform in combat. It was the ultimate test of a pilot's skill, a controlled crash. Doing it at night, in a rocky valley, with a damaged airframe, wasn't just difficult. It was statistically impossible. Shut up, rookie, she commanded, her voice strained. But level. I've got it. Her hands and feet moved in a blur of practice motion, a dance she had rehearsed 1,000 times in the simulator. She lowered the collective to maintain rotor speed, pushed the cyclic forward to gain airspeed, and kicked the rudder pedals to keep the nose straight. She was trying to turn their plummet into something resembling a glide, using the remaining momentum of the rotors like the wings of a maple seed. Her left arm was a searing river of fire, the gash from the earlier shrapnel now bleeding freely, soaking her flight suit. Black spots danced in her vision, but she blinked them away. She would not fail. Not now. She scanned the valley floor through the cracked canopy, her eyes seeking a place, any place, flat enough to land. It was all rocks and jagged inclines. Then she saw it, a small, postage stamp-sized patch of relative flatness near the riverbed, barely larger than the helicopter itself. It was their only chance. The SEALs on the ground. The sight was apocalyptic. Their guardian angel, the invincible archangel, was falling from the sky in a trail of smoke and fire. Thorne felt his heart sink. They had won the battle, but they were about to watch their savior die. Get a fix on that crash site, he ordered, already starting to move. We are going after him. We don't leave anyone behind. Anya wrestled the dying machine. The ground rushed up to meet them with terrifying speed. Brace for impact, she yelled. At the last possible second, just feet from the ground, she pulled back hard on the collective. It was the final, most critical step of the auto-rotation, the flare. It used the last bit of stored energy in the rotors to cushion the landing. The remaining blades bit into the air, groaning in protest. The Apache's descent slowed dramatically. They hit the ground not with a catastrophic crash, but with a bone-jarring, teeth-rattling thud that snapped the landing gear and sent a shockwave through the entire airframe. The helicopter skidded for 20 yards, shedding pieces of its fuselage, before lurching to a final, violent stop, its nose buried in a snowdrift. For a moment, there was only silence, broken by the hiss of hydraulic fluid and the ticking of hot, cooling metal. The cockpit was a wreck. The instrument panels were dark. Smoke filled the air. Anya's head was slammed against the side of the canopy, and her vision swam. She tasted blood. "Rookie, you okay?" she coughed, her voice a weak rasp. A faint groan came from the seat beside her. I think my leg's broken, Captain. But I'm alive." Alive. The word echoed in Anya's head. They were alive. Against all odds, she had done it. She had landed a crippled, powerless Apache in the middle of a hostile valley in the dark. A wave of exhaustion so profound it felt like a physical weight washed over her. She wanted to close her eyes, just for a second. But the fight wasn't over. Her tactical display, running on emergency battery power, flickered to life. It showed the SEALs' positions. And it showed something else. A new group of heat signatures, appearing from a cave system on the far side of the valley. A second wave of enemy fighters. They were moving not toward the SEALs, but toward the crash site. Toward her. They were coming to finish the job and capture or kill a downed American pilot. At the same time, her helmet radio, also on battery, crackled. It was Colonel Hastings, his voice tinny and distant, somehow patched through from Bagram. "Archangel 1, do you read me? Your transponder is offline. What is your status?" "I'm down, Colonel," Anya transmitted, her voice weary. "Aircraft is destroyed. We are in one piece, for now. Trident 4 is safe, but I have a new enemy element moving on my position." There was a pause. Hastings's next words were grim. "The PJs are still 30 minutes out, Captain. The storm is closing back in. I can't get anyone to you." He paused again, and when he spoke next, his voice was heavy with a terrible finality. "Egress the aircraft and prepare to evade. That's an order. Evade. In this terrain, with an injured co-pilot, against a fresh wave of enemy fighters? It was a death sentence. It was an order to run and die in the snow." Anya looked at Rookie, who was trying to unbuckle himself, his face pale with pain and fear. She looked at the smoldering wreck of her Apache, and then her eyes fell on the controls for the 30mm chain gun. The aircraft's main power was gone, but the gun had its own auxiliary battery unit, a last-ditch power source designed to give a downed crew a few final seconds of a fighting chance. It held enough charge for 1, maybe 2 short bursts. Her Apache wasn't a helicopter anymore. It was a stationary turret. A pillbox. She made a decision. She wasn't going to run. She was a pilot. She was a warrior. She would die in her cockpit. This was her ground to stand on. She knew the cost of defiance, the price of holding the line when every instinct screamed to flee. If you've ever had to find that last ounce of strength to see something through, hit that like button. We all know that feeling of digging deep when there's nothing left. She keyed her comms to the SEALs channel. "Trident Actual, this is Archangel. I am down but not out. I have eyes on a second enemy wave moving toward you from the west. I am going to engage them from my position. Hold your ground." Thorne, who was already halfway to the crash site with his team, stopped dead in his tracks. He couldn't believe what he was hearing. The pilot had just survived a missile attack and a crash landing that should have killed him, and now he was preparing to fight again? From a wrecked helicopter? The sheer, insane bravery of it was staggering. "Archangel. Negative." Thorne yelled into his radio. "You get the hell out of that bird. We are coming to you." "No time, Trident," Anya's calm voice replied. "They'll be on you before you can get to me. Keep your team safe. I'll hold them here." Before Thorne could argue, he saw it. A line of fighters, at least 20 of them, emerging from the caves, moving quickly across the valley floor. The crashed Apache was directly in their path. The pilot was intentionally drawing their fire, creating a diversion so the SEALs could consolidate and prepare for the extraction that was still minutes away. It was a deliberate, knowing sacrifice, and then something else happened. A mini reveal that changed the entire tactical situation. A single technical truck, a pickup with a heavy machine gun mounted in the back, broke from the rear of the enemy formation. It wasn't heading for the SEALs or the downed Apache. It was peeling off, racing toward a narrow pass that led out of the valley. In the back, surrounded by guards, was one man who was clearly in charge. He was shouting orders, pointing toward the pass. Deacon, looking through his high-powered scope, suddenly hissed, "Marcus, that's him. That's the HVT. The bomb maker. He's escaping." It was him. Their target. The whole reason for this bloody, disastrous mission. In the chaos, he was slipping through their fingers. Thorne felt a surge of cold fury. They had come too far, lost too much, to let him get away. He screamed into his radio, his voice raw with desperation, a plea to the Phantom in the wrecked cockpit. "Archangel, the HVT is getting away. A technical, heading for the East Pass. He's bugging out. We can't get a shot from here. You're the only one who can." Inside the cockpit, Anya heard him. She watched the technical racing away on her flickering screen. Her targeting system was a mess, glitching and freezing. The auxiliary power was already starting to fade. She had maybe 30 seconds of battery life left. She used the last of her strength to manually power up the M230 chain gun. The familiar hum vibrated through the floor. She gripped the gunner's controls, her hands slick with her own blood. Her vision was starting to tunnel, the edges turning dark and blurry. The pain in her arm was a distant, throbbing drumbeat. The technical was getting smaller, a fading heat signature on a dying screen. It was an impossible shot. A moving target, at extreme range, with a damaged gun, failing power, and a pilot who was bleeding out. She had one chance. One burst. She put the targeting reticle where she thought the truck would be in 3 seconds, leading it like a duck hunter. Her finger rested on the trigger. The power indicator on the gun system blinked red. It was now or never. "Come on, you son of a bitch," she whispered, her voice a prayer to the gods of war and machinery. From the ridge, Thorne watched the truck speed toward the pass and freedom. He watched the silent, smoking wreck of the Apache. Nothing was happening. He'd waited too long. The pilot was dead, or unconscious. They had failed. His shoulders slumped in defeat. "He's gone," he muttered, the words lost in the wind. But then, the night tore open one last time. From the mangled nose of the down helicopter, a final, defiant stream of 30mm cannon fire erupted. It wasn't a long burst, just a handful of rounds, a final, desperate gasp. The red traces seemed to hang in the air for an eternity, a final, angry sentence being written across the dark canvas of the valley. Anya held the trigger down until the auxiliary battery died and the gun fell silent, her screen going black at the exact same moment. She had no idea if she'd hit it. She slumped forward against the controls, the darkness finally claiming her. The last thing she heard was the distant, frantic voice of Marcus Thorne on the radio, his words lost in a roaring wave of static and unconsciousness. The 30mm rounds, the last message from the dying Apache, crossed the valley in less than 2 seconds. They were high-explosive, dual-purpose shells, designed to pierce armor and then detonate. From Marcus Thorne's vantage point, it looked like a string of angry red fireflies chasing the distant, fleeing technical truck. He held his breath, a silent prayer on his lips. The last round in the burst seemed to find its mark. There was a tiny flicker of light, almost imperceptible at this distance, followed a second later by the deep, satisfying whump of an explosion rolling back across the valley. Deacon, his eyes still pressed to his scope, let out a whoop of savage joy. Direct hit. He got him. The truck is gone. HVT is KIA. I repeat, HVT is KIA. A wave of triumphant, exhausted relief washed over the SEALs. They had done it. Against all odds, they had gotten their man. But their victory was instantly tempered by a sobering reality. The pilot, their savior, was still down there in a wrecked helicopter, with 20 enemy fighters closing in. The final, defiant act of the Archangel had drawn the full attention of the enemy. The insurgents, their leader now a cloud of vaporized metal and flesh, turned their rage toward the source of their defeat. They charged the crash site, a wave of men hungry for revenge. "Go!" Thorne roared, his voice galvanizing his team into action. "Move! Get to that cockpit!" Trident 4 charged down the slope, firing as they went, laying down a wall of suppressive fire to protect the downed pilot. They were no longer fighting for a mission objective. They were fighting for the life of the brother-in-arms who had refused to leave them behind. They reached the crippled Apache just as the first enemy fighters did, and the clearing around the wreck became a swirling, desperate melee of close-quarters combat. Inside the cockpit, Anya was drifting in a grey, painless limbo. The sound of the battle outside was a distant, muffled drumming. She was vaguely aware of faces appearing at her shattered canopy, of hands pulling at her flight suit. She felt herself being lifted, carried. The cold night air hit her face, and she managed to crack her eyes open. She saw the grim, bearded faces of the SEALs, their expressions a mixture of concern and fierce protectiveness as they formed a perimeter. Around her and Rookie, someone was applying a tourniquet to her arm, cinching it tight with practiced efficiency. The pain brought her back to the edge of consciousness. The pilot, he's alive, one of the SEALs shouted. He's losing a lot of blood, but he's alive. Thorne pushed his way through. He knelt beside the figure they had just pulled from the pilot seat. In the dim, green glow of their night vision, he saw a slender frame, a flight helmet. That seemed too big, and a face pale and smeared with blood and hydraulic fluid. "Son, can you hear me?" Thorne asked, his voice gentle. "You're going to be okay. We've got you." Anya tried to speak, but only a weak groan escaped her lips. The world was spinning, fading to black again. The last thing she saw before passing out completely was the arrival of the PJs, the pararescue jumpers, sliding down ropes from a hovering Black Hawk, their blades kicking up a whirlwind of snow and hope. Her next moment of awareness was of bright, sterile light and the steady beeping of a machine. She was in a hospital bed at Bagram's medical facility. Her arm was bandaged and elevated, and an 4-line was taped to her hand. The pain was a dull, manageable throb, thanks to a healthy dose of morphine. Colonel Hastings was standing at the foot of her bed. His usual stern, authoritative expression was gone, replaced by something she had never seen on his face before, a look of profound, unadulterated respect. He cleared his throat. "Captain Sharma." "Colonel," she rasped, her throat dry, "the official report will state that you encountered unforeseen weather phenomena and, despite catastrophic mechanical failure, successfully completed your mission and saved the lives of 6 members of SEAL Team Trident 4. It will also state that you neutralized a high-value target, a mission that had a 2% probability of success." He paused, looking down at the floor for a moment before meeting her eyes again. "The unofficial report is that you disobeyed a direct order, flew a crippled bird into an impossible fight, and performed with a level of skill and courage that I have not witnessed in my 30 years of service. You will be recommended for the Distinguished Flying Cross." Anya just nodded, too tired to fully process his words. All she could think about was her co-pilot. Evans. Rookie. Is he? Warrant Officer Evans has a compound fracture in his femur, but he'll make a full recovery, Hastings said. He's already told everyone in this hospital that his pilot is the toughest person in the entire United States Air Force. He's not wrong. Hastings hesitated, then took a step closer. "Anya, I was wrong. I underestimated you. That is a failure of command I will not make again. Get some rest, Captain. You've earned it." He turned and left without another word. Anya closed her eyes, a single tear tracing a path through the grime on her cheek. It wasn't about the medal. It wasn't about the apology. It was about the simple, quiet acknowledgement. It was about the fact that they had all made it home. That was the only victory that mattered. This feeling of shared sacrifice and vindication is a powerful one. It's the reason good people run into danger, not away from it. If you believe in that kind of courage, give this video a share so more people can hear the story of Archangel 1.A. Few days later, Anya was cleared for light duty, her arm in a sling. She was walking across the tarmac, the Afghan sun warm on her face, when she saw them. 6 men, standing near the hangar that housed the Apaches. It was Trident 4. They were bruised, bandaged, but alive and whole. They all turned as she approached. Marcus Thorne stepped forward. He was a big man, broad-shouldered and imposing, with eyes that had seen too much. He stopped in front of her, his expression unreadable. The other SEALs stood silently behind him. There was an awkward silence. These were men who lived and breathed in a world of violence and action, not words. Thorne cleared his throat. We were looking for the pilot. The one they call Archangel." Anya simply looked at him, her gaze steady. "You found her." Thorn stared. He looked at her, then at his men, then back at her. A slow wave of comprehension washed over his face. Disbelief. Confusion. And then, finally, a dawning, profound understanding. The deep, calm voice on the radio, distorted by the comm system. The ferocious, almost poetic violence of the pilot. The insane bravery. He had built a picture in his mind of a legendary warrior, a giant of a man. He had never, in a million years, considered that the angel of death who had torn the night open for them was the quiet, unassuming female captain he'd seen once or twice around the base. The title of the story, his Apache, was born from their assumption, from a world of hardened expectations. He was speechless. For a man used to being in command, the feeling was unfamiliar. He didn't know what to say. Words felt cheap, inadequate. For what he felt, for the debt he and his men owed her. He had come here to thank a man, to shake his hand and buy him that promised steak and whiskey. Instead, he stood before the woman who had saved his life, and he was humbled. He finally broke the silence, his voice low and raspy with emotion. I see. He reached up to the sleeve of his uniform and, with a soft rip of Velcro, he removed his team patch. It was a black patch with a golden trident and the number 4 embroidered on it. It was a sacred symbol, a piece of identity, earned through blood, sweat, and impossible trials. He stepped forward and, without another word, he pressed the patch onto the empty Velcro square on the shoulder of her flight suit. It was a gesture more powerful than any medal, more meaningful than any parade. It was the ultimate sign of acceptance and respect from the most elite warrior tribe on the planet. They were claiming her as one of their own. He stepped back and looked at the patch on her shoulder. It looked like it belonged there. The call sign Archangel is a bit formal, don't you think? Thorn said, a small, weary smile finally, touching his lips. Your file says they call you Valkyrie. I think we'll stick with that. It's more fitting. Anya looked down at the trident patch, then back up at Thorn and his men. She saw in their eyes the same thing she had seen. In Hastings's, respect. Hard-earned and absolute. She gave them a slow, tired, but genuine smile. Valkyrie, she repeated softly. I like the sound of that. Thorn gave her a short, sharp nod, a gesture of profound solidarity. Then he and his men turned and walked away, leaving her standing alone in the sun. The final, lasting image was not of a medal ceremony or a cheering crowd. It was of a lone pilot, her arm in a sling, with a Navy SEAL team patch on her Air Force flight suit, a quiet, symbolic bridge between the sky and the ground, a testament to the fact that in the heat of battle, there are no men or women. There are only warriors. And on the darkest night, in the deepest valley, when all hope was lost, it was Valkyrie's Apache that had torn the night, and their prejudices wide open.